MedBix Webcast is a new kind of healthcare media channel to break the silo mentality and foster interdisciplinary thinking. Our mission is to fill that gap and to create a curiosity through different lenses, tapping the passion that guided the historical figures in medicine and bringing present-day groundbreaking research to the front lines. We interview physicians and leaders in the industry about present-day healthcare challenges on our live programming. Hey, welcome to the MedBix Webcast. This is Ramana Annamaraju, the host of the MedBreaks. No, I'm not Albert Einstein. Probably my guest most closer. He can come closer to the Einstein's ideas and everything. Dr. Eben Alexander is going to be joining with us, and then there is another doctor who is going to join with us. She's a podcast host. Diana Landonio is going to join with us. Actually, I wanted to, how I came across Dr. Alexander, very interesting. I was a vivid reader of Scientific American. He was an argument, or he was kind of talking with somebody back and forth with a gentleman. He's arguing with Dr. Alexander about his stories, all these things. I didn't know what Alexander went through, Dr. Alexander. So I was curious. After that, but the guy who was, I don't know his name exactly, I forgot his name, but the guy who was arguing with Dr. Alexander is citing some of the not really science, is twisting science itself, a little bit. So I jumped in. Dr. Alexander responded to me at the time. He probably doesn't remember. But that was my first encounter, and then I went through a little bit more about him, and it was a fascinating story. I'm going to play his background a little bit. Let me show you his background from a channel on ABC. I'm going to play that and see what do you think of it. Then I hope he's going to join soon. I'm waiting for him. But let me play this video of Dr. Alexander. So you will get some introduction. Okay, thank you. Wait 1 second.
2020 continues. Is there proof of heaven? Once again, Elizabeth Vargas.
8 million Americans claim to have had a near-death experience, but neurosurgeon Eben Alexander never thought in 1,000 years he would be one of them.
What did you think those were?
Fantasies, hallucinations.
He was a man of science. He didn't believe in it. That is, he says, until it happened to him.
Let's talk about how you got sick. You woke up in the middle of the night feeling ill and in pain.
It was like being struck by a freight train. 4:30 in the morning, woke up. Never had anything like that before. My last words to my wife, don't call 911. Trust me, I'm a doctor. It's just a muscle spasm. And I was gone.
Dr. Alexander had a rare and deadly form of bacterial meningitis which was infecting his brain. In a matter of hours, this healthy man was on death's door. By the time they got him to the hospital, he was in a coma.
So your wife was being told that you might die?
And that she would be raising our 2 boys without me.
But as his body lay in that hospital bed with no recognizable brain activity, Dr. Alexander says he had already begun an astounding journey. A journey to a place he'd said didn't exist.
Did you believe in heaven?
When I was younger, I thought a heaven and a loving God made sense, but through my academic neurosurgery career, I saw less and less that could be the case.
The journey began, he says, in a dark, formless place without memory, language, or time. But then
I was rescued from that by this spinning melody of light that came closer and opened up, and was a rip in the fabric of reality that just opened up around me.
You described this world as hyper vivid.
The colors were extremely vivid, with millions of butterflies. And these flowers blooming, blossoms opening as we flew by.
And by his side, an unknown presence.
There was a person guiding you, a beautiful girl, as you describe her. Tell me what she looked like.
She had a beautiful face with a wide smile and high cheekbones and absolutely gorgeous, clear blue eyes. She never said a word to me. She would look at me and the thoughts would come directly into my mind, into my awareness.
What thoughts?
And the thoughts were, you are loved, you are cherished. There's nothing you can do wrong. I always remember being told, we will teach you many things, but you'll be going back.
Back to the hospital where his wife kept her vigil and his doctors were giving up hope. On the 7th day of his coma, he opened his eyes.
It was just nothing but a miracle.
His first words, the very words he'd heard from his guide, that blue-eyed girl.
All is well. Don't worry, all is well.
Within weeks, Eben Alexander had made an astonishing full recovery.
How are you different after going through this experience?
Well, my family says I'm nicer.
That's a good thing.
Really has changed me in every way by realizing that our souls are eternal.
The book he has written, Proof of Heaven, has sparked a lot of controversy.
You know, you do have skeptics out there who are just saying it's not uncommon for people near death to have all sorts of funky things going on inside their bodies.
Well, that's why the fact that I had meningitis that was so severe, I mean, that should not have allowed for any experience.
And then this with the eyes just
Alexander
shows how
maintains his brain was so completely shut down that the visions he had could simply not have been generated there. He says he wrote down everything he remembered, now in his book, before speaking to anyone, so as not to taint his memory.
You then went on to read about other people's near-death experiences. Was it striking how similar what you had written was to what they had experienced?
It was absolutely astonishing.
I really felt the white light was God.
I stopped walking and I saw my grandma.
You could see peace, you could see love.
In all the other afterlife stories, everybody told of being guided by a loved one who had died. You had as your guide a girl you'd never met.
I must say that was very haunting. Why would I go through all that and not have my father there? My father, who was a neurosurgeon, I idolized him, and he had passed over 4 years earlier. Why wasn't he there?
And why the blue-eyed girl instead? Dr. Alexander had been adopted as a child. Years later, he found his birth family, all except for one, his birth sister, who died before he met them.
Her name was Betsy.
How old was she when she died?
She was 36 years old.
So Betsy you'd never met?
I just heard what a beautiful, loving soul she was. How she worked in a rape crisis center and took care of many people who were unfortunate. And she was just a very loving, loving person.
How was it that you came to see a picture of her?
My birth sister, Kathy, had promised to send me a picture of Betsy. And it was about 4 months after my coming out of the hospital when that picture arrived.
He opened the envelope and saw it for the first time. The photo, he says, was of that blue-eyed girl from his vision.
And it was so stunning. And that picture was almost as if she's saying, "Do you get it now?" And I cannot tell you how powerful that was. There was no mistaking it. That's exactly who it was.
Life is back to normal at the Alexander household these days. There are soccer games to watch, dinners to be shared, grace to be said. But Dr. Alexander says he's on a mission now.
I hope to tell my story to everyone I possibly can around this world, because I think it will help this world to be a much better place.
System. But anyway, Dr. Alexander, I gave introduction about you and played a video on ABC. Thank you for coming. You're not feeling well, but you showed up. Thank you, sir. The third time, I'm honored, completely honored. Think of the mind and body connection. This is a big debate, Dr. Alexander, as you know, as is a big debate, that mind and body. There's two schools of thought. One school of thought is mind is a reducible, is emergent property of the brain. The other school of
Right.
thought is mind is just a universal consciousness is there somewhere. It is a mind is nothing to do. It is not. We are just a filtering mechanism brain. That's what you're saying about mind and body connection.
Well, I think the problem, Rene Descartes was trying to put us into a dualistic mode, where you have mind and brain, you have the physical world, and you have our perception of it, and then pretend that they seem to work in parallel, but they both seem to exist. But the problem is, the only thing we really know to exist is mind and the contents of mind. That's what people experience. And in fact, I would say the best way to start making sense of it, really acknowledge that and say, well, we have mind, and then start understanding how the physical can emerge from the mental. How can the mental have so much power over determining what we observe and what we experience? And so for me, as we argue in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, some form of idealism, of the prominence of mind over matter, is going to be the answer. And of course, as my partner, Karen Newell, who is also the co-author in that book, Living in a Mindful Universe, always reminds me, it's really spirit over matter. And when we say that, of course, we're just acknowledging that this thing we call mind is not individual. This thing we call mind is shared. And the evidence for that is overwhelming. For example, telepathy is a very real phenomenon. 25% of identical twins have powerful telepathic experiences. And telepathy is clearly operative between many other humans other than just identical twins. But once you start realizing that mind is not created by the brain and is not isolated, in a 3.5-pound gelatinous mass sitting in a warm, dark bath between your ears inside your skull, then we start realizing this grand aspect of mind. And that's really where we have to go, is more towards a form of idealism. And I think the more you hear us talk about it, and especially this kind of shared concept of mind, because I think the one mind hypothesis, or the primordial mind hypothesis that we argue in Living in a Mindful Universe, is really the closest to reality. I'm sorry about my lighting. It's
That's okay. You're fine. Greek philosopher Plato, he said that something about that is also only mind. All the physical things are illusion. That's one of the Plato's concept was ideal world and the principal world. He says that only these are the shadows. The real physical objects are the shadows of the mind. That's what he says. So this is a. Can you explain a little bit about the Plato and the Leibniz? Also, you mentioned the living mindful universe. Leibniz, I don't know I know his physics of the mathematics. He did calculus, but he did something about the mind also. I didn't understand what he said.
Well, I think it's really this concept of the primacy of mind. You really cannot escape it. And of course, that's where materialism went totally off the rails, by pretending that all of this was just local material interacting by the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. In fact, that materialist science would argue you don't even have free will. But I think this very kind of expanded view, which would kind of take Plato's world of ideals and really run with it, is kind of all that any of us really know. I mean, for me, in my near-death experience, I came face to face with a very direct experience of the world of ideals, but for the individual soul. Now, when I say individual soul, of course, you're never a lone soul. Souls operate, in tandem. And that's one of the beautiful things, is we come to realize the most important thing at the basis of existence is our relationships with others and our interactions with others. And this is the process by which mind or consciousness evolves. I would say that the bigger picture of this discussion is right there with Pierre Teilhard de Chardin in his book, The Phenomenon of Man from the mid-20th century, where he acknowledged that there was an evolution going on. At that time, the discussion was about Darwinian evolution in biological systems on Earth, but he knew there was something much bigger evolving, and that was all of consciousness. And that is what I think we're coming to realize. That's how this world works, and that all of consciousness is in this beautiful dance between individual sentient beings living their lives, but it's the choices they make with their free will and how their lives unfold that they learn the lessons of this oneness of mind and of our interconnectedness. And certainly, if you take near-death experiences seriously, the deepest lesson that humans are to learn in this era is one of love, compassion, kindness, how we're all in this together. And so this is not just some neutral mind field, but really one that's oriented towards our evolution towards that sense of love and connection. I call it the love of the creator for the creation. But that's really something that all of us experience in these broader journeys. For example, when we're liberated from the body and brain at the time of bodily death, that's when the mind force kind of re-engages with this ocean of the primordial mind. And yet there's a certain viscosity, so that you have this whole literature on reincarnation stories, for example, out of University of Virginia, where they have more than 2,700 such cases they've studied. And that's where you find that that this whole thing is a much bigger theater of operations than that of the individual mind, birth to death, nothing more. And that's where I think broadening our kind of discussion to this much grander field of the soul and the eternity of soul is what starts to make much more sense. And the NDE in that setting then simply becomes kind of Plato's world of ideals for the individual soul, and allowing us to go through life reviews. And an important thing to understand about life reviews is Bruce Grayson, who's had more than 45 years as a skeptical psychiatrist investigating near-death experiences, will tell you is the majority of them, something like 75%, involve experiencing things from the perspective of others, not just our own perspective. So in other words, during the life review, you recognize that we're sharing the dream of the one mind, and it's our interactions that are important, but that ultimately we are not individuals, but we're souls working together in terms of evolving towards this deeper understanding of our connection with the universe.
When he appeared on Larry King now, that he was very skeptical about that. He was, how do you convince me? He's asking you, how do you convince me I will be reborn again? This is the end of the story. This life is, if once I die, everything is end. That's what he said. You answered something very eloquent. Could you please tell us that conversation?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that question. This was which conversation?
Larry King now, he appeared on the Larry King now. He said that I don't believe in reincarnation. I'm going to die. How do you convince me that he's asking you the question? How do you convince me that this is not the end of the story?
Well, I think you start with near-death experiences, and they're fairly common. Pim van Lommel's Lancet paper, a very respected medical journal in 2001, Pim van Lommel analyzed hundreds of cardiac arrest patients and found that basically 1 in 5 of them had an extraordinary experience at the time of death. So that's a starting point. But of course, people argue, well, near-death experiences don't die, so I want to really know what happens when you die. Well, to get to that answer, you move beyond near-death experiences. And for example, you move into the territory of shared death experiences. I know I had many people come up to me after my talks early on, and they would share their own NDE or an after-death communication or something. But about 1 in 20 of them had a profound shared death experience where, for example, they might be gardening when their mother is dying 1,000 miles away. And when their mother dies, her soul comes through, grabs their soul, and the two souls go off together, even witnessing a full-blown life review of the mother's soul. And then the bystander soul comes back to this world. Shared death experiences are a tremendous argument against the materialist pseudo explanations that pretend that this is oxygen deprivation in the brain or carbon dioxide levels in the dying brain, etc. Shared death shows you something far more amazing that these phenomenal experiences, just like what happens in NDEs, can happen in perfectly healthy people. And then move beyond that discussion and include, for example, hospice, terminal care. There's a book by Christopher Kerr, who's the head of Hospice Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. And that book is called Death is But a Dream. And he is only interested in terminal care and what those people experience. And what he found is that 86% of his patients had very profound end-of-life dreams and visions that were exactly what you hear about in near-death experiences. They reunited with souls of departed loved ones. They ascended from darkness up into light. They had visited another realm. I mean, profound experiences in the hospice setting, the terminal care setting. And 99% of those patients who had such experiences said they were more real than the events of their normal living life. So when you put all these pieces together, and then, of course, if you go as far as we do in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we go beyond these issues of parapsychology and evidence for non-local consciousness. And we include philosophy of mind and the binding problem. We include the hard problem of consciousness applied to neuroscience, which is really an impossible problem for materialist neuroscience trying to pretend that the brain creates consciousness de novo out of physical matter. And we include, of course, quantum physics. So there's a tremendous amount of additional information that you can contribute to NDEs. We call it consilience. That is when all of these lines of evidence, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, parapsychology, non-local consciousness, quantum physics, all suggest that mind is primary in the universe. Let's pay attention to that. And that is exactly what this primordial mind hypothesis is all about, that we talk about in Living in a Mindful Universe. And it really looks at the brain as a filter, a reducing valve that kind of reduces that primordial mind down into this little eddy current of consciousness that we kind of take as our own, but all these lines of evidence show that we're sharing this one mind. And so when
What do you mean by filter means everything, all the possibilities exist, and then our mind is filtering that some of the things that is required, that is needed for us to survive?
Well, I would say that the realm of possibilities is wide open to accept whatever choices our free will may make in all of the decisions we make in our lifetime. But ultimately, I think, especially as we become more aware of this and realize that our little ego mind and its little view of our mission through life and that little linear narrative of how events unfold in our life is only a tiny little subsection of who we truly are. And it's by expanding our notion of self, acknowledging that we've been here many lifetimes before, that our relationships with others are reshuffled lifetime after lifetime in a process of refining our knowledge and experience of this kind of shared love and connection. This is really where, to me, it becomes a much more expansive journey of understanding. And it really has to do with coming to a deeper understanding of kind of shared meaning and purpose that we have with our fellow beings and with the universe at large. So yes, free will is operative. There are, completely wide open possibilities for the choices we make in life. But that's why it's so important to get this kind of higher perspective that enables us to kind of see ourselves in that much grander context. In many ways, that's where I would say all is well. That's what, I assured people when I woke up from my coma. I don't remember that, but my younger sister Phyllis told me that within 20 minutes of waking up and being extubated after a week in coma from E. coli meningitis, from which I was not expected to recover. It was so wild to see me sitting on the bed. She said I looked like a little Buddha. And I was looking at everyone around me saying, don't worry, all is well. And then I'd move on to the next one. And this notion of all is well is something that becomes more visible to us when we take this far grander view of our life. And that's where we come to realize, for example, that the hardships, the difficulties, the challenges in life, in fact, in many ways are gifts. They're milestones that mark our progress forward. And it's how our free will responds to that. The more we're able to recover a sense of oneness and love and connection with the universe, in spite of many of the apparent hardships, I think is a beautiful lesson to the grander souls that we are. And especially when you realize how near-death experiences and similar study of all these other parallel lines of evidence can be so reassuring. They take away that sting of death, that notion of finality and oblivion that materialism says is what happens after death of the body and brain, because that's not what happens. Our awareness actually expands when you get rid of the filter. And it gives us a much grander view of who we really are. So when you can see your entire lifetime in that life review, and even previous lifetimes, and some people reporting even events of future lifetimes, you start to realize in that realm, in that spiritual realm, from that perspective, it all starts to come together and make more sense. And this is where, for me, meditation is so important, because any of us as sentient beings can come into this knowledge. You don't have to have a near-death experience to come into knowing this, but do start exploring mind. And for me, a very powerful tool for meditation is sacred acoustics. Anybody who wants to learn more about this binaural beat brainwave entrainment, go to sacredacoustics.com. But that, for example, is what I've been using this morning to try and short circuit this bad cold virus that I picked up 2 days ago so that I could do this interview. And I spent about 3 hours this morning in deep meditation using sacred acoustics, and I think it made a tremendous difference.
You look perfectly normal.
As he breaks into coughing. But no,
I want to show you from the physics point of view, if you don't mind, a consciousness video I put together from the physics point of view. Is it okay if I play that one in a few minutes?
Go right ahead.
I think then after that, actually there was a hardcore mathematician, Stephen Wolfram, says that filter theory is real. The reason was he's saying that our humans are constrained by three-dimensional things, but there are a lot of higher dimensions are there. All the reality we don't have an access to. That is what he's saying. But this is a physics point of view. I show you this video, a quick video that after that. Quantum Physics for Doctors, Mystery Object in Medicine by Ramana Annamaraju. Dr. Champagne is a critical care physician and faculty member at Stony Brook University School of Medicine and a member of Pulmonary Critical Care Division. Dr. Pania is the prime investigator for a large study across multiple medical centers around the world about bringing people from cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest is the arrest of pumping blood due to the malfunction of electrical activity in the heart. Cardiac arrest results in death within minutes without quick resuscitation. The resuscitation is the combination of procedural techniques of bringing someone from edges of death. One of those resuscitation techniques is a cardiopulmonary resuscitation, popularly known as CPR. Any delay administering in CPR, even for minutes, results in certain death. But there are certain exceptions and anomalies that raises several questions than answers in medicine and science.
34-year-old Audrey Mash went hiking with her husband on November 3rd when things took a turn for the worse. The couple got lost and Audrey went into cardiac arrest from severe hypothermia. But 6 hours after her heart stopped beating, doctors at Barcelona's Vall d'Hebron hospital were able to resuscitate her.
Amazing. It's like a miracle.
Audrey Schumann fully recovered and went back to her life as Audrey Schumann. Listen carefully what I said. She came back to life after dead for 6 hours as Audrey Schumann, not as a Margaret Thatcher, not as an African princess. Which one or what entity told her she is still Audrey Schumann? This is not some religious or a philosophical question. This is still under purview of scientific inquiry, particularly the process of cardiac arrest. Dr. Champagne is a prime investigator for the study called AWAKE, examines the process of dying and reviving. He conducted these studies in multiple medical centers around the world with reputable physicians with more than 2,000 subjects who went through cardiac arrest and successfully revived. Dr. Champagne argues there is a presence of some entity that is external to our world, beyond our space and time, reminding Audrey Schumann her identity. That entity is called consciousness. The study is a scientific odyssey of consciousness, the journey through an unknown world about some kind of a subjective awareness. Dr. Sam Parnia had faced a resistance from scientific establishment without giving a due process and trying to sweep the studies under the carpet. The detractors' claim is the so-called consciousness has no place in the field of medicine. But Parnia may have support from an entirely surprising field that is not so related to medicine, that is quantum cosmology. Andrei Linde, a well-known Russian-American professor of physics at Stanford University, gives a mathematical proof for the existence of consciousness. Linde was one of the authors of the theory of inflation. Professor Linde is a member of the National Academy of Sciences. When you apply quantum laws to the entire universe, the total energy of the universe must be equal to zero. If that is the case, nothing happened, nothing should happen, and nothing will happen in the entire history of universe. If everything is a zero-sum game, the act of you watching this video never happened, but the facts dispute, you know you're watching it. That is a scientific paradox. To solve this paradox, quantum cosmologists reluctantly injected an entity called a conscious observer. Your physical body is not excluded from the universe, but your consciousness is. Your mind became an observer. Now the entire energy of the universe can be equal to zero, your consciousness being the recorder of the history of the universe. Consciousness is the only way out to satisfy the mathematical equations of the universe. If you try to understand the conscious observer behind every patient, you see a great wonder and a mystery. You will become a perfect healer of body and mind. Computers cannot replace physician as such, because the still unknown, still mysterious entity called consciousness is not computable. Only other conscious observer like you has the power to understand. This is Ramana Hannamaraju. Thank you for watching. What do you think, Dr. Alexander?
I like your video, and especially the way you started out with a case of the woman who had a cardiac arrest for many hours. It reminds me, of other cases I know of. For example, Dr. Mary C. Neal, who had a profound near-death experience after more than 30-minute warm water drowning while kayaking in Chile back in the late 1990s. And she wrote a book called To Heaven and Back. And she had a profound spiritual experience. And she was brought back to the surface dead, and they resuscitated her. She ended up making a full recovery. And you ask any physician what the brain is like after more than 30 minutes in a warm water drowning, and they tell you, no, it's turning to mush. And yet she had a profound recovery. One of the most extraordinary cases is one George Rodinea, who was actually killed by the KGB, put in a morgue for 3 days, and then he woke back up and he had a profound experience. So to me, these extraordinary cases just show us the value of acknowledging kind of our spiritual essence and this grander aspect of self beyond the ego self. And then, of course, you start getting there in that video into quantum physics. And I think what most people need to understand, for one thing, it's important to acknowledge that the founding fathers of quantum physics, like Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, Max Planck, Pascual Jordan, and others, made a very big deal of the fact that consciousness, this kind of knowing, and our ability to be aware of our existence in the universe, is something that is not trivially related to kind of a materialist interpretation, but that consciousness itself seems to be a primordial ingredient of the universe. And this, of course, is where we go in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, is to make exactly that argument. And one needs only reflect back, for example, to the measurement paradox. That's the kind of the deep mystery in quantum physics, where it's the choice of the observing scientist that actually determines which way an experiment will go, that goes far beyond just investigation, but showing us that we have a creative role in our emerging reality. And this is what John Wheeler, who was the head of physics at Princeton University, had been on the Manhattan Project. Wheeler came up with what he called the participatory anthropic principle. And that was that the world we observe is deeply influenced by our mind and our kind of mental interaction with the universe at large. And it's really kind of a shame when you realize it, because Wheeler, as much as he acknowledged this kind of reality of mind as a true entity and not something that was kind of separate or resultant from the material world, and yet he falsely accused J.B. Rhine of the Rhine laboratory at Duke, who did a lot of parapsychological experiments. Wheeler falsely accused him of fabricating data. He later retracted that in the 1980s, but that accusation was very unfair. And also he tried to prevent the American Parapsychological Association from being part of the AAAS, one of the best global scientific organizations on earth. Luckily, Wheeler's protest did not bar them from membership, because I think parapsychology is a very important arm in understanding this bigger notion of the primacy of mind. And yet Wheeler, as smart as he was, he couldn't quite make that connection. So he was trying to put down Rhine and the parapsychological work and prevent them from being part of a big scientific organization. But ultimately, he retracted that. And I would say that quantum physics is one of the biggest supporters in the current era of the reality of primacy of mind. That's why, for example, the awarding of the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022 for entanglement, the connection of subatomic particles across space and time, is really the first major admission by the Nobel Prize Committee that that old theater of four-dimensional space-time and everything that we thought was kind of a local realism going back thousands of years to the times of Aristotle and Plato was no longer the ultimate theater of operations. Once you acknowledge entanglement, you're saying that there's a layer of information, integration, and assimilation that we have access to as sentient beings that goes far beyond our normal notions of physical causality in a four-dimensional space-time. So entanglement itself, even though you'll certainly find quantum physicists who will argue otherwise,
entanglement is really a magical. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. The point I'm trying to make is that physicists, actually, the point you're trying to saying that is very important. The physicists, they go away from, they say they don't like a word magic, and then they start telling at the end, they start telling the bigger magic, actually.
Right.
This is the problem with, being a physicist. I watch that all the times, they start with, quantum, the realism, non-locality, that is not a really magic. Then the moment then they say multi-universe, multiverse, and millions of billions of trillions of multiverse, it's a much more bigger magic, they're saying. So this is the problem with the business. They need to know how to communicate with the people in right way. That is a big challenge in that sense, So if you try to get away from this kind of trying to tell everybody that magic is not there, and then you end up telling a bigger magic, this really confuses people, in my view,
Yeah, well, I think that that's very true, and this discussion leads us naturally into the realm of mind over matter, our ability to exert the will of our higher soul to manifest what happens in this universe. And I would say one of the most practical examples of that is in healing, is in coming into personal health. And you can start with, for example, placebo effect. That's been the gold standard in medicine for assessing any new treatment going back at least 60 or 70 years. Of course, placebo effect has been around for thousands of years. But it's simply an acknowledgement that the beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes of the patient and of caring healthcare workers has a tremendous influence on what emerges, what we see as healing. And you can start with placebo effect, but then move into spontaneous remission. If you go to noetic.org, the Institute of Noetic Sciences website, put in spontaneous remission as a search term, you'll find a book that they put together in the mid-1990s by Carlisle Hirschberg and Brendan O'Regan. And that book had more than 3,500 cases of spontaneous remission of advanced cancers. advanced infections, all beyond any kind of medical intervention. And then, of course, you can go into the territory of miraculous healing and near-death experiences. But all of it is showing us the progressive power that we have as sentient beings when we're, connected in that much bigger sense with the universe at our own healing. And of course, this is when we're leaving the little ego mind and its little false beliefs of fear and anxiety and the limitations of materialist thought. We're leaving that far behind in the rearview mirror, because this is where I think medicine is evolving rapidly to acknowledge this power we have over our own health and wholeness.
Dr. Alexander, you met Dalai Lama. Tell us a little bit about your experience meeting Dalai Lama.
Well, all I can tell you is a soul that is absolutely richly entangled with all of us and with the universe at large, where the ego has long ago disappeared. The Dalai Lama was just a joy to meet. Karen and I met him. We met him in Charlottesville here at a meeting back in October of 2012. But then he invited me to participate in a graduation ceremony at Maitripa University. I think it was in 2014, 2013, somewhere like that. And just to give a brief talk at that graduation ceremony about the scientific evidence for reincarnation. But I can tell you that the Dalai Lama is just a beautiful example of, first of all, the active inner child that is associated with a very advanced soul. And all of us should follow that kind of model and realize that the pathway to this kind of enlightenment and understanding is really one of a childlike curiosity and enthusiasm about the well-being of the world at large. That love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, these incredibly important human kind of qualities and abilities is what can take us along a pathway towards that oneness with the divine. And the Dalai Lama is just one beautiful example of a soul that is that advanced. And I can just tell you that Karen and I both thoroughly enjoyed meeting the Dalai Lama and having a chance to participate in that graduation.
Beautiful experience. I have a great friend. Her name is Diana Landonio. She's a doctor. Actually, she has a podcast, and I think she joined in and out, and she's supposed to join. And she is also proposed. She talks about her podcast about love and compassion are the two powerful tools being a healer. Great fan of this med breaks. She's a great supporter of it. Doctor, my brother died last year in bacterial meningitis. In fact, he's a nuclear engineer. He was traveling around the world, and then he was installing nuclear reactors. And all of a sudden, he got stuck with the new bacterial meningitis and died within a day. He's like a father figure to us, and it was a big loss for all of our family members. So I was reflecting the life. What do you think is the purpose of life is? Why we are on the? I wanted to ask you, as a physician, as a philosopher, as she joined. Let me bring her. Hey, Diana. Welcome, Diana.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
That's
Hey,
Dr.
Diana.
Diana Landonio.
Nice to meet
So-
you. Sorry,
Me too.
I'm in my red scrubs. I'm like, this is not a good time to be bringing me on. I'm like in the middle of a clinic, but I listened to your talk, and it was really powerful, and it was really beautiful. So thank you for sharing your story, and your talk is really powerful.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And we were just getting into the importance of kind of love and kindness in the heart as a healer. And of course, that's
Absolutely.
important for any one of us in coming to our own healing. But for those of us who, kind of view our lives as being in the work of healing others and helping others, there's no question of how compassion, empathy, love, kind of sharing the commonality of our existence, I think is a very important ingredient. And that's what I have found in so many of my colleagues who work in healthcare. I think that they get that, they acknowledge that, they manifest that. And yet, interestingly, we're all trained in this kind of modern conventional science, which at its heart is very much materialist. And that's where I'm hoping that the current era, the last decade or two, with our demonstration of the primacy of consciousness and interconnectedness of mind is something that can help all of us come to a richer sense of how we're truly all in this together. And to help others is to really help ourselves. And likewise, of course, any of us who hurt others in many ways are hurting ourselves. So it's recognizing this kind of connection of souls into this kind of primordial mind, this shared heart consciousness, can be very beneficial at seeing ways forward towards healing and coming into wholeness.
I agree, absolutely. I mean, law of karma is real. Even if you don't believe it, it's a law and it's real. Whatever we do unto others, it comes right back. So if you learn the lesson, the more you do good, the more it'll come back to you. The more you do bad, the more it'll come back to you. So it's so important, how we treat others, how we treat ourselves with that love and compassion. And all the research. I mean, all the research that shows all the things that happen internally in every cell of our body when we're in a heart-centered compassionate state versus like the anger, the burnout, the fear, how we either heal ourselves or cause our disease. And then we can say that about others too. So absolutely. I mean, there's so much truth to that, and it's so important to hear from a physician and a surgeon, because I think hopefully more of us in medicine start really realizing it's not just all surgery and meds. There's like much more to it.
Right.
And healing even comes just from the presence, from the belief that you're going to get better more than like what we may do, So
Right.
when we as surgeons start sort of realizing that and seeing that other dimension of healing and not just prescribing or being a technician, there's so much more healing that can happen when we truly do that. So I think it's so important to hear that from your perspective.
Coming back to the question, Dr. Alexander, what is the purpose of life? After my brother's death, and I realized the physical body is not eternal, even though soul is eternal, what Diana was saying. But what is that purpose of this life, you think?
Well, I kind of, in response to that question, I often go back to the inscription over the temple of the oracle at Delphi in Greece, know thyself. And I believe that ultimately, as we come to realize that our mind is not our own little ego mind, but that ultimately we are sharing the mind of heart consciousness of the universe, and to know that connection very deeply with a shared meaning and purpose that it implies, that is the meaning of life. And so what that would inform in your particular question about your brother is I would want to ask, I've heard from thousands of people who have lost loved ones, who have then had some form of communication from their loved one that showed them that their soul was still there, that they were still actively with you. And in fact, I know when I first gave talks about my Proof of Heaven experience, beginning about 2 years before the book Proof of Heaven came out, I had many people come up and share their stories with me of their own NDEs or after-death communications or what have you. But so many of them said that the greatest gift that their loved one gave them was some assurance that their souls were still connected after bodily death. And so to me, those, all those diamonds of light, of those connections, those pieces of evidence showing us that our loved one is still with us, has been a tremendous part of the growth that we can have individually towards this oneness of mind and eternity of soul. So I think somewhere there is where I would define the purpose of life is coming to a deeper understanding of kind of that grandness of soul, far and beyond the little ego mind and its little petty fears and anxieties.
Alexander, what we hear a lot about nowadays, UFOs. What do you think of just to give us some your thought about that a little bit? UFOs.
Well, to me, there's absolutely no question that what these fighter pilots are seeing, and recording on gun cameras every day for weeks on end, and some of the other evidence I've seen lately, no question that technology is out there. It's advanced far beyond anything that we have the capability of. It's not Russian or Chinese. This is far advanced, whether it comes from extraterrestrials, from humans in the future, time traveling back to us, I don't know, but it's a very advanced technology. And I think the evidence is overwhelming that it's real. I've had my own kind of personal experiences and within my family of contact with extraterrestrials. I'm just not sure what to make of it. It's not my field of expertise. I can recommend the writings of Ray Hernandez, R-E-Y
Yeah.
Hernandez, who has written about the contact modalities. He sees a lot of overlap. I know with my friendship with Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, I know he had tremendous respect for a lot of what he knew about the reality of UAPs, of orbs, of very intelligent kind of spiritual forces seeming to interfere with nuclear tests and with military satellites, things like that. I think they're here to help us because it would be the ultimate form of madness to have human beings destroy this planet with nuclear war or something as insane as that. I mean, to me, it's crystal clear that the number one priority for our world today is to get rid of nuclear weapons. There's no way anybody would ever accept that it should happen, that some madman get in control of those things and destroy this world. So it's time to get rid of the nuclear weapons, acknowledge that it's really kind of the authoritarian, dictatorial leaders against the people. It's not nation versus nation, but the real conflict is with these dictatorial military leaders who would consider destroying the world with nuclear weapons. They are the enemy, and it's time for the U.S. to take a lead in denuclearization. I think China and Russia, the U.S., we all need to take a lead in getting rid of these horrific weapons. They have no purpose for existing in this world. But I do believe that at some deep level, the UAPs represent forces that are here to try to protect us.
You mentioned corporate greed, Dr. Alexander. That is actually Deepak Chopra saying that with this greed kind of thing, we are walking into sleepwalking into extinction human race. So, do you have some comment on that? In a corporate greed, how do you solve this?
Well, corporate greed is just a form of toxic egocentricity or narcissism. For decades, the energy industry knew, in fact, we knew back in the early 20th century that burning carbon fuels would heat up the planet. Carbon dioxide lasts for hundreds of years. In the oceans, we've used up their buffering capacities. The evidence is crystal clear now that, human caused climate change is going to be our death, this whole planet. Millions of species threatened with extinction. And it's all because of corporate greed. They ignored the scientific evidence on purpose because the profit motive, the almighty dollar. Well, this is where the science of consciousness can lead us in a new direction, because the science of consciousness tells us we're all in this together. We're connected through that binding force of love. We're here to take care of each other. And that implies a much richer role for leaders in this world, away from corporate greed and narcissism, and towards caring for the higher good.
And compassion are the powerful tools at the end of the day. That is from Hinduism to in the science to physics to everything. All the roads end at the love and compassion. In the healthcare, that need to be extended. We are not taking care of other people with the insurance companies and these kind of artificial things we're putting together, not caring for other people. We need to make this love and compassion that you're professing. That is very important. Can you give us the final word on the love and compassion?
Well, I think there's just kind of a beautiful sense of kind of karma and balance in the universe. And the best way to harvest love and compassion from the universe is to serve as a conduit for love and compassion from the source in our dealings with all of our fellow beings. The more we manifest love and compassion for others, the more we'll bathe in an ocean of that love and compassion. So it's kind of a very simple concept and yet very powerful in what it can bring to our lives. And of course, this is another reason why meditation, centering prayer are very important, because they give us a respite from the kind of incredible struggling match of our ego.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. Your cough is gone. You look more energetic now. Thank you so much. It's an honor and privilege to have you. I'm always enjoy your conversation with you.
Well, Ramana, thanks so much for having me on. It's great talking with you as always. And we'll talk again sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely, sir.
We are retelling their stories through our patented designs that can be worn on scrubs, t-shirts, printed on conference bags, and endless other promotional materials. Daily Wear for Medicine is the first ever of its kind to create curiosity in medicine through visual art. We at MedBricks are celebrating unsung heroes of the past who made enormous contributions to the field of medicine through our unique campaign called Daily Wear for Medicine. You can wear it, carry it, and give it.